He stood at the pulpit, Bible in hand, suit pressed, voice steady. It was Easter Sunday. Hundreds watched, phones recording, children dressed in white, the choir ready to sing. He opened his mouth to preach the resurrection, but instead, he said, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. Gasps, silence, then chaos. Some thought it was a mistake. Others walked out in tears. But for Pastor Jonathan Blake, it was the first true sentence he had spoken in years. For 6 months, he'd read the Qur'an in secret, tried to disprove it, tried to hate it, but every page pulled him deeper, until he could no longer lie to his Lord or to his congregation. And when Easter Sunday came, he chose to rise differently. Press 1 if truth ever cost you everything. Press 2 if you're still searching. But whatever you press, don't miss what happens next, because not every resurrection looks the same. Pastor Jonathan Blake was a man of routine. Wake at 5, coffee at 5:15, prayers by 6, sermon prep from 6:30 to 8. He didn't miss days, didn't skip scripture, didn't leave room for questions, because questions were cracks, and cracks let in doubt. For over 20 years, he preached with fire, led revivals across Texas, filled pews, baptized hundreds. He was respected, quotable, feared by atheists and Muslims alike, especially Muslims. Islam, he once said in a sermon, is the greatest lie ever sold. But God has strange ways of reaching people, sometimes through storms, sometimes through silence, and sometimes through a lost copy of the Qur'an. It arrived anonymously, left in the church mailbox one morning, wrapped in brown paper. No note, just the title, The Qur'an. English translation. He chuckled, some kid playing games. He tossed it on his desk. It sat there for 3 days, then 4, then 7, until one restless night he opened it. He wasn't trying to understand it. He was trying to shred it, line by line, like a lawyer looking for loopholes. He read the opening verse. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. He paused, not because he agreed, but because something about the rhythm landed. He turned to Surah Maryam. Curiosity maybe, or arrogance. He read about Isa, about his mother, about the birth that came without a father. Peace be upon me, the day I was born, the day I die, and the day I will be raised alive. Surah Maryam, 1933. Jonathan blinked. He had read that line before, in another book, but never quite like this. He shut the Qur'an, shook his head. No, but sleep didn't come. The verse echoed, again and again. He got out of bed, opened it again. This time he flipped randomly. Surah Al-Ikhlas. Say he is Allah the One, Allah the Eternal. He neither begets nor is born, and there is none like unto him. Jonathan exhaled, simple, sharp, uncompromising. No trinity, no metaphor, just oneness. He closed the book and set it on the shelf, far back behind older theology texts. But he came back to it, again the next night, and the next. By the end of the month, he had read it cover to cover twice. He wasn't supposed to feel this: conviction, clarity, a terrifying kind of peace, in a terrifying kind of war. Because now, he was preaching one thing on Sundays, but believing something else in silence. He stared at his own sermons like they were fiction, spoke the name Jesus, but found himself thinking Isa, quoted Paul, but remembered the Qur'an. He was splitting in two. He tried to pray the way he always had, but the cross on the wall no longer looked like salvation. It looked like a question, and the name Muhammad no longer sounded foreign. It sounded like a door. He stood before the mirror one evening and whispered, La ilaha illallah. He couldn't finish it, not yet, but his lips had formed the truth. And that was enough to make him fall to the floor, not in fear, but in relief. The man who once declared Islam a lie was beginning to feel like it was the first thing that ever told him the truth. For the next 2 weeks, Pastor Jonathan Blake lived in two realities. By day, he stood behind the pulpit preaching resurrection, redemption, and the blood of the Lamb. By night, he sat at his kitchen table, reading the Qur'an under a dim light, whispering verses he never thought would enter his heart. The tension was unbearable. Scripture in his hands, truth in his chest. But how could he leave everything, his congregation, his salary, his name. One Thursday morning, he opened his laptop and searched mosque near me. A small masjid popped up 20 minutes away. He clicked the website. Basic, no faces, just prayer times and a short note. All are welcome, even if you just want to observe. He stared at that sentence for a long time, then closed the laptop, then reopened it, then closed it again. By Friday, he had made a decision. He wouldn't go to convert, wouldn't go to pray. He'd go to see, to make sure he wasn't crazy, to see Islam alive, not just on a page. He arrived 15 minutes before Jumu'ah, sat in his car, watched men walk in, young, old, some in jeans, some in robes. No one looked at each other with judgment. No one looked afraid. They looked like they belonged. He finally stepped out. His hands trembled, heart racing. He walked up the steps and opened the door. Instantly, the scent of wood and carpet hit him, shoes lined up neatly on racks, children whispering, a soft murmur of Arabic in the air. A brother greeted him near the entrance. "Assalamu alaikum, brother." Jonathan froze. "Hello," the man smiled. First time he nodded. "Come, sit. You're our guest." He followed him inside the prayer hall. Men were lining up. Some were praying quietly, others reading Qur'an. The imam stood up to begin the khutbah, and then it started. A sermon in English, clear, calm, about the mercy of Allah, about how turning back to God was always possible no matter how long you'd been gone. Jonathan listened like a starving man at a feast. The imam said, "There are some among us today who are standing on the edge of a decision. They've read, they've prayed, they've searched, and they're wondering, could this really be for me?" Jonathan stopped breathing. The room was silent. "To them I say, Allah brought you here. That's already your answer." Tears welled in his eyes. He turned away slightly, covered his mouth. He wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't supposed to feel this, wasn't supposed to believe, but he did, and it terrified him. After the prayer, the same brother approached him again. "Would you like a Qur'an in better English or someone to talk to?" Jonathan shook his head. I'm not ready for all that." The man didn't push. "Whenever you are, we'll be here, even if it's just to sit." He walked out quietly, but the masjid didn't leave him. That night he lay in bed, fully clothed, Qur'an on his chest. His Bible was still on the nightstand. He stared at both. Two books, two paths, one truth rising quietly from deep within. He stood, faced the Qibla as best he could, raised his hands and whispered, "God, I know who you are now, but I'm still afraid of what it will cost me." Then he lowered his forehead to the floor, not out of ritual, out of surrender. He didn't sleep that night, not because he was uncertain, but because he finally was. The calendar on his office wall mocked him with every passing day. Easter Sunday, 4 days, the biggest service of the year. The sanctuary would be full. News cameras, choirs, local politicians. Everyone would be watching, waiting for Pastor Blake to deliver his thundering message about resurrection and redemption. But he had nothing to give them. His sermons were once fire. Now they were ash. Each time he opened his Bible to prepare, his eyes drifted to the Qur'an tucked in his desk drawer. He had hidden it well, but not from himself. He tried once more to write. Typed, "He is risen" at the top of the page, then stopped, because the only thing rising in him was a truth he could no longer deny. Say, "He is Allah the One." Surah Al-Ikhlas, 112:1. That verse had broken something in him, and it wasn't faith, it was falsehood. He spent the next 3 days in silence, didn't answer emails, ignored texts, walked alone after dark whispering dua he hadn't memorized but felt instinctively. On Friday, he returned to the masjid, sat in the back row, didn't speak, didn't introduce himself, just listened. The khutbah was about truth, how hiding it is worse than disbelief, how Allah guides the sincere but tests the brave. That night he stood before the mirror in his home, stared at the collar around his neck, the fabric that once gave him purpose. He removed it slowly, hung it on the doorknob, then whispered, "Am I about to lose everything?" On Saturday, the choir rehearsed. He watched them through the glass hands trembling. He had baptized most of them, married some, buried their parents, and tomorrow He might break all their hearts or set himself free. He didn't sleep that night. Again, he opened the Qur'an one last time. Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 256. Let there be no compulsion in religion. Truth stands clear from error. He smiled. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel torn. He felt ready. Easter morning came with golden light. The parking lot overflowed. People hugged, children laughed. The choir tuned their voices. And behind the sanctuary door, Jonathan knelt on the floor of his office. No collar, no sermon notes. Just two words repeating in his heart, Allahu Akbar. He walked to the pulpit just before 10 a.m. The crowd rose to its feet. Applause filled the room. He didn't smile. He couldn't. Not today. He opened his Bible, then closed it, paused. The choir waited. The air thickened. He looked across the room, saw friends, former mentors, his wife. Then he said quietly, "At first, there is no God but Allah." Gasps. A woman fainted. The room froze. And Muhammad is his messenger. He stood still. No emotion, no fear, just peace. Some rose to leave. Others stayed too shocked to move. He continued, I've read, I've wrestled, and I can no longer stand before you in the name of something I don't believe." He took off the mic, placed it on the pulpit, stepped down. Outside, the spring air felt different, cool, alive, like something heavy had been lifted not from his shoulders, but from his soul. He walked to his car in silence. No one followed. No one stopped him. He drove straight to the masjid. Isa was waiting. He didn't ask questions, just hugged him and whispered, "Welcome home, brother." He changed his name to Yusuf the day after he left the church, not to erase his past, but to mark the man he refused to be again. Jonathan had preached for 2 decades, but Yusuf was learning to listen. The backlash came fast. Headlines: Pastor turns Muslim on Easter morning. Community in shock after religious betrayal. The congregation felt abandoned. The elders were furious. His wife filed for divorce within the week. Friends stopped calling. Emails flooded in with words like traitor, heretic, liar. Some even accused him of being paid off by Muslims. He read every message once, then deleted them all. Not out of anger, out of clarity. Because he had finally found peace and nothing would pull him back into noise. He moved into a small apartment on the east side of town. No pulpit, no followers, no stage, just a mattress, a Qur'an, and a prayer mat. Each morning he woke up before Fajr, performed wudu slowly, stood barefoot facing the Qibla. He didn't know all the Arabic yet. His tajweed was broken, his rhythm unsure, but his heart was anchored. He missed preaching, not the attention but the clarity. So he began writing in silence. Journals filled with thoughts, ayahs, and reflections. He didn't publish them, didn't blog, he just wrote to remember. Because when the whole world erases you, you write to leave footprints for your own soul. The masjid became his sanctuary. He came early, sat in the back, listened more than he spoke. Some recognized him, whispered, wondered if he was serious. But Yusuf didn't flinch. He had been applauded by thousands and abandoned by the same. So now he prayed not for approval, but for forgiveness. One day after Asr, a young brother approached him. "Were you?" That Pastor Yusuf nodded. The boy looked down, then said, "I heard your story. It made me proud to be Muslim." Yusuf smiled gently. "I'm just trying to live one ayah at a time." That night he prayed longer than usual. He raised his hands after Salah and whispered, "Ya Allah, you took everything from me, but you gave me back myself." He began memorizing Surah Yusuf, not just for the name, but for the story. A man thrown in a well, betrayed by family, imprisoned for no crime, but still a prophet, still beloved. He cried at verse 87, "Do not despair of the mercy of Allah. Indeed, none despairs of Allah's mercy except the disbelieving people." He paused, spoke aloud, "I'm not that man anymore." Weeks turned into months. Ramadan came, his first. He fasted alone, broke his fast with water and dates in a 1-bedroom apartment. Read Qur'an late into the night. Sometimes not understanding, but always feeling. On the 27th night, he stood in Qiyam for the first time. His knees ached, his back tightened, but his heart, it opened. And in the final sujud of the night, he didn't ask for fame. Didn't ask for his old life back. He just said, "Let me die a Muslim, even if no one remembers my name." He left the masjid that morning with tears on his face and light in his chest. A child outside handed him a date and said, "Uncle, your beard is getting long." Yusuf laughed for the first time in weeks. He still walked alone, still prayed in whispers, still lived simply. But inside something had shifted. He was no longer hiding from the world. He was walking toward his Lord. It started with a simple email. Subject: Interfaith Panel Invitation, location Central University, Chapel Hall. Topic: Faith and Identity in the 21st Century. Yusuf almost deleted it. He didn't do panels, didn't seek the spotlight. He had left that pulpit for a prayer mat, but something about the timing, the place felt like a door he was meant to walk through. He replied, "Yes, I'll come." He didn't know who else would be on the panel. Didn't ask. He prepared quietly, made notes, not to impress, but to stay centered. Say, "My prayer, my sacrifice, my life, and my death are for Allah, Lord of the worlds." Surah Al-An'am 6:162. He underlined it 3 times. The night of the event, he wore plain clothes, a loose shirt, clean trousers, simple kufi, no collars, no stage presence. Just a calm, weathered man with a Qur'an in his chest. The auditorium was packed, hundreds of students, professors, church members. He sat on the end of a long table, 5 speakers total. As the moderator introduced the guests, Yusuf sat still, until and lastly, Dr. Martin Hayes, senior pastor of Grace Hill Church. Yusuf's heart stopped. Martin, his former mentor, spiritual father, the man who once said, "Jonathan, your voice was made for preaching," now seated just 3 feet away. Martin didn't react, didn't even blink. But Yusuf felt it, the weight, the history, the grief. The panel began. Each speaker shared thoughts on faith and modern identity. When Yusuf's turn came, he spoke slowly. "I used to think truth had to be shouted. Now I believe it must be lived." He spoke about his journey, his fear, his surrender. He didn't mention names, didn't attack, only reflected. When Martin's turn came, the air grew tight. He adjusted his mic and said, "I knew this man when he preached the gospel. I watched him baptize Mary and bury hundreds. And now, I watch him claim a book that denies the Son." Gasps in the audience. Yusuf didn't move. Martin continued, "I don't say this in hate. I say this in heartbreak, because I've lost a brother not to death but to deception." The room was silent. Eyes shifted to Yusuf. He picked up the mic, held it gently and said, "You didn't lose a brother. You watched one come back to the one who never left." The room stirred. Some clapped. Some sat stunned. Some bowed their heads, unsure what to believe. Martin looked away, then back. "Do you truly believe Muhammad brought truth?" Yusuf didn't hesitate. "I believe he brought me to it." After the event, students surrounded him, asked questions, requested books, thanked him for his calm. Martin didn't stay. He walked out quietly into the night. Yusuf watched him go, didn't call out, didn't chase. He simply whispered, "Guide him, Ya Rab, as you guided me." That night, Yusuf sat at his desk, opened his Qur'an, wrote in his journal, "Today I stood before the man who once raised me and didn't fall, because Allah raised me higher." He turned the page, wrote one line in Arabic, "Alhamdulillah, alladhi hadana li hadha, all praise is due to Allah who guided us to this." He closed the journal, prayed 2 rak'ah, tears on the rug, forehead pressed low. He wasn't just surviving, he was walking truth in public and still returning to sujood in private. Yusuf never intended to teach. He had spent so many years preaching that when he embraced Islam, he vowed to spend the rest of his life listening. But sometimes truth pulls others toward you, especially when you stop trying to be the one who speaks loudest. It began with one brother after Fajr, a convert struggling with reciting Al-Fatiha. Yusuf sat with him one-on-one, taught him syllable by syllable, not with pride but with patience. Then another came, then 2 more. Soon every Tuesday night, Yusuf opened his apartment to a small circle. New Muslims, born Muslims who drifted, even curious non-Muslims who said nothing, just listened. He didn't call it a halaqah, he called it a gathering of returners. On a quiet Tuesday evening just after Maghrib, a knock came at the door. Unusual, everyone was already inside. He opened it slowly and froze. Standing there, eyes tired, hands shaking, was Elder Matthew. The same Elder Matthew who had baptized him as a teenager. The same man who once said, "Jonathan, when I look at you, I see a man anointed to lead." Now standing with shoes in hand, whispering, "May I come in?" Yusuf stepped aside. The room fell silent. Matthew removed his shoes, sat on the floor without being told, didn't look around, didn't speak, just stared at the Qur'an on the table. After a long pause, he said, "I saw the video. Easter Sunday, I was watching online." Yusuf nodded softly. "I didn't plan to say it, but it came out, like breath." Matthew smiled, weakly. "I didn't sleep for weeks after. Tried to hate you, tried to pray it away." He looked up, but I started reading. Yusuf's breath caught. Matthew continued, "The Qur'an. I don't know what I was expecting, but what I found," he trailed off, then said, "was peace." The room stayed silent. Everyone watching this moment unfold like a miracle, quiet and human. Matthew whispered, "I don't understand all of it. I'm still afraid of what it might cost me." Yusuf leaned in. "I was too." Matthew gestured toward the group. "You teach, I share," Yusuf said. "I'm still a student." Matthew blinked slowly. "Can I be one too?" That night, Matthew sat beside a teenager who didn't know Arabic and a woman who had memorized Surah ad-Duha through tears, and he listened. Not as a pastor, not as a mentor, just as a man who came to find what Yusuf had once thought he'd lost forever: truth. After everyone left, Yusuf made tea. The two of them sat in silence. The room felt like a bridge built from decades of faith, broken and rebuilt with sincerity. "I never asked you," Matthew said, "how it felt. The moment you said it." Yusuf looked down. It felt like dying. He paused, and being born in the same breath. Matthew wiped his eyes. "I'm not there yet, but I'm close." Yusuf placed his hand on his shoulder. "You're already walking. Allah meets people where they turn, not where they arrive." That night, Yusuf prayed tahajjud with more presence than he had in weeks. His sujood felt heavier, not from burden, but from gratitude. Because even if the world had taken much from him, Allah had returned more. Not in numbers, not in praise, but in hearts, one by one. Before sleeping, Yusuf opened his Qur'an, Surah An-Nasr. When the help of Allah comes in victory, and you see the people entering into the religion of Allah in multitudes, then glorify the praises of your Lord and seek His forgiveness. He closed the book and whispered, "Ya Allah, I never needed a stage. I just needed you." It had been 1 year since the pulpit fell silent. 1 year since Jonathan Blake walked out of his church and into Islam, into Yusuf. But today he would speak again. Not to command, not to convert, just to remind. The masjid was full, men shoulder to shoulder. Sisters upstairs leaning forward over the rail. People had heard that Brother Yusuf was giving the Friday khutbah, his last before leaving for Hajj. Some had driven 2 hours, others had taken the day off work. Even Elder Matthew sat in the front row, still not Muslim but still walking the path. Yusuf stepped up to the minbar. No collar, no spotlight, just a man with a heart that had been broken and rebuilt by Allah's hands. He began in Alhamdulillah. All praise is due to Allah. His voice was steady, soft but full. The masjid leaned in. "I used to preach to be heard. Now I speak because I was found. I once thought truth lived behind a microphone, but I found it in a whisper, in a sajda, in the pause between ayahs. I lost everything the day I embraced Islam, but I gained myself." He looked up, met the eyes of students, immigrants, elders, people who had never known his name before Islam, people who only knew him as Yusuf. And somehow, that was more than enough. He continued, "Some of you are new Muslims. Some of you are rediscovering this deen. Some of you are still unsure if you belong. I want you to know I once stood in front of thousands, yet felt more alone than I ever have in this room. I was a man of the Bible, and I still love Maryam, still revere Isa. But now I say their names the way they were first spoken. Now I bow not out of tradition, but out of surrender. And let me tell you this." He leaned closer to the mic. There is no joy in being applauded by the world if you are forgotten by the one who made it. A quiet sob broke out in the back row. Another followed. Yusuf paused. Let the silence say what words could not, then smiled gently. I leave for Hajj next week. I don't know if I'll return, and that's okay, because if Allah takes me in that land with my head in sujood, then everything I left behind was worth it. He stepped down, led the prayer, folded his rug, and walked off the minbar for the last time. After Jumu'ah, the crowd surrounded him. Tears, hugs, hands pressing du'as into his palms. Matthew came last. No words, just an embrace. Later that night, Yusuf sat on his balcony under a violet sky. A breeze moved through the date palms. The adhan floated through the air. He looked up at the stars and whispered, Ya Allah. I left a pulpit for a prayer rug, and in that trade you gave me everything. That night he packed for Hajj, 2 white cloths, a small journal, and a letter for his son, the one who had stopped speaking to him after his conversion. The letter read, If you ever wonder why I walked away, it was never from you. It was always toward him. In the morning he prayed tahajjud. His voice cracked on Surah Al-Fatiha, but his sujood was still, long, alive. He boarded the plane with nothing but peace in his chest, and somewhere over the Atlantic he closed his eyes and dreamed of a house without walls, a call without microphones, a prayer without fear. And the man once called pastor was now a servant finally free. Yusuf's journey reminds us that truth is not always loud, it often whispers. He was once praised by thousands, revered in pulpits and clothed in certainty. But deep inside, he wrestled with questions no sermon could silence. It wasn't anger that led him to Islam, it was courage. The courage to lose status, family, and reputation in exchange for standing bare before Allah with only sincerity. His story teaches us that faith is not inherited, it is chosen, often in quiet defiance of comfort. And in that choice there is pain, but there is also peace. We are all called in some way to step off a ledge of what we know into the vast unknown of what is real. And like Yusuf, if we listen, we might just find the one who has been calling us all along, not from the stage, but from the stillness. And in answering, we are reborn. He didn't have a home, didn't have a name anyone remembered, just a bench and a book someone left behind. He wasn't looking for God, but one night, it felt like God was looking for him. And what happened next, it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it shook the sky. Because 3 days after he whispered the words, La ilaha illallah, he bowed down in prayer and never got up again. No one saw it coming. No one knew who he was. But when they turned his body over, they saw something that silenced the entire masjid. And would you recognize the moment if it was your last? Press 1 if you believe some people were born to find truth at the end. Press 2 if you think every soul deserves at least one chance to return. But don't scroll, because this story might be the reminder you didn't know you were waiting for. He sat on the far right bench of the 19th Street bus station. Same coat, same backpack, same slouched posture. People passed him every day, but no one remembered if he was there yesterday or the day before. He had become part of the scenery, like a crack in the sidewalk or an old poster no one bothered to tear down. He wasn't violent, didn't beg, didn't shout at the wind like some of the others. He just sat, quietly, watching life move while his own stood still. No one knew his name. Maybe not even he did anymore. Once long ago, he had a job, a laugh, a bed. Once someone had called him Michael. But that name hadn't been spoken aloud in so long it felt like a story someone else had lived. Now he was just the man on the bench. To most, he didn't exist. But one morning something changed. It wasn't much. A small black book left on the bench beside him. No one saw who put it there. It wasn't there the night before. He almost ignored it, thought it might be trash. But something about it made him pause. The cover was soft, worn, but intact. On the front, the Qur'an, English translation. He squinted at it. Was it a Bible? A religious tract. He opened to a random page and read one line aloud, barely a whisper. Indeed, Allah is with those who fear Him and those who are doers of good. He had no idea who Allah was, but something about that sentence stuck to him like morning cold. He closed the book and held it in his lap. That night, under the dim orange glow of the broken street lamp overhead, he opened the book again. He read slowly, mouth moving with each word. The sentences were strange at first, repetitive, but oddly rhythmic, almost like they were meant to be heard out loud. He wasn't sure what he was reading, but he couldn't stop. The next night he read again, and the next. He didn't know what Tawheed meant, didn't understand the laws, but he understood pain and mercy and loneliness. And this book, this Qur'an, it spoke to those things like nothing else had. One night he stopped cold at a verse. Say he is Allah the One, Allah the Eternal Refuge. He neither begets nor is born, nor is there to him any equivalent. Surah Al-Ikhlas. He whispered it again, slower this time. His lips trembled. It didn't feel like poetry or philosophy. It felt like truth, pure, uncompromising, undeniable. Not a God made in man's image, but the one. He looked around. No one was watching, just passing cars, a sleeping city, and the stars. He closed the book and held it to his chest, tight. For the first time in years, he didn't feel cold. From that night on, he never went anywhere without it. Folded in his jacket, pages marked with scraps of paper and old receipts. He still didn't understand much, but he understood this something inside him had cracked open, and the only thing pouring in was light. Some nights he didn't even read. He just held the book, closed his eyes, and let the silence speak back to him. He didn't know what would come next. He didn't know how to pray, didn't know if he belonged in any place anymore. But deep in the marrow of his bones, he felt something he hadn't felt in decades. He was being seen, not by people, not by strangers, but by something greater, something that didn't care if he was clean-shaven, educated, or well-fed, something that had been watching him long before he'd fallen apart, and now was calling him back. He didn't have the language for it, but he knew. The Quran wasn't just speaking, it was pulling. And he, the man no one noticed on the bench, was finally listening. The bus station was louder during the day horns, blaring, people rushing announcements, echoing through cheap speakers. But somehow the man on the bench remained invisible. He had become part of the background. Even the pigeons ignored him. Even the street sweepers swept around him like he wasn't there. But something had changed inside him, something no one could see. He had a book now, and it was doing something to him. He didn't read it for religion. He wasn't looking for God. He didn't even know how to look. But the verses, they spoke like wind through locked windows, like water dripping through cracked concrete. Not loud, but insistent, patient, like they had been waiting for him. Each night he found himself flipping to the same passage, and do not despair of the mercy of Allah. Indeed, Allah forgives all sins. Surah Az-Zumar 39:53. He didn't know how to pronounce Allah right, didn't know what sins Islam considered the worst, but he knew what he had done. He remembered the alley behind the liquor store, the face of the woman he abandoned, the time he stole food and wasn't even hungry. And yet this verse said, do not despair. He read it again, louder this time. Do not despair. His voice cracked, his chest ached. He had heard people say, God is love before. He'd seen it on bumper stickers, graffiti church signs. But none of those words ever looked directly at his kind of darkness. They danced around it. They avoided the parts of him that were too broken. But this verse, this was a straight stare into his worst moment. And it said, I see you, and I still want you. The tears came without warning. Not the kind that burst like rain, but slow one at a time, falling like something sacred was being rinsed out of him. He wiped his face quickly, didn't want to be seen, but for the first time he was grateful no one noticed him. Grateful to weep in peace. That night he couldn't sleep. The bench was harder than usual, his coat thinner, but his heart was burning. He sat upright and stared at the Quran in his lap, whispered aloud to no one, what do you want from me? No reply, just wind and silence. But the kind of silence that didn't ignore him, the kind that listened. He flipped the pages again. This time his eyes landed on another verse. Indeed, those who say our Lord is Allah, and then remain steadfast, the angels descend upon them. Surah Fussilat 41:30, he whispered it. Our Lord is Allah. He didn't know what steadfast meant, but something in that line hit deep. If he could just say it, just once, would it be real? Would it be heard? The next morning, a man sat down beside him, young, clean, kind face. He handed him a small paper bag, some bread and water. The man on the bench blinked. No one had spoken to him in days. He nodded. Thank you. The young man smiled. I see you reading that every night, he said, pointing to the Qur'an. The man on the bench tensed. I'm not religious, he muttered. You don't have to be, the young man said. That book finds people before they find religion. He extended a hand. My name's Kareem. Michael, the man said, unsure why the name came out. He hadn't used it in years. Kareem smiled wider. Well, Michael, I come by every evening, if you ever want to talk. That evening, Kareem returned. They didn't speak much, just sat. But before leaving, Kareem placed something soft on the bench, a small folded piece of cloth, a prayer mat. If you ever want to try, he said, start with this. Then he walked away. Michael held the cloth in both hands. It was nothing, and it was everything. He didn't open it yet, but he didn't let it go. He sat for hours, just him, the cloth, the book, and a stirring inside him that wouldn't leave. Something was building, something bigger than fear. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was the door before hope, the breath before belief. The next evening he waited, not for the bus, not for change, but for Kareem. It wasn't something he had planned. It just happened like gravity pulling two things that were always meant to meet. And when Kareem appeared with the same quiet smile and the same paper bag, Michael felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Noticed. They sat in silence at first. The city moved around them, unaware that something was blooming quietly in its forgotten corner. Finally, Kareem spoke. You've been reading a lot. Michael nodded. I can't stop. Kareem grinned. That's how you know it's working. Michael glanced down at the prayer mat still folded in his lap. He hadn't used it. Not yet. But he hadn't let go of it either. I don't know how to pray, he admitted. I mean, I don't even know how to sit right, or stand, or what to say. Kareem leaned back. That's okay. You don't have to know everything to begin. You just need to want to begin. Michael nodded slowly. His eyes softened. I want to. I just don't want to do it wrong. You can't do it wrong, Kareem said. Allah isn't waiting to catch your mistakes. He's waiting to catch you. They talked for nearly an hour. Not theology, not doctrine, just life. Michael didn't tell him everything. Not yet. Not about the shelters, the bottles, the voices that used to call him worthless. But Kareem didn't need the full story. He could already hear the pain behind the pauses. And that was enough. Just before leaving, Kareem opened his backpack and pulled out something new. A Qur'an. Not the English-only paperback Michael had been reading. This one had Arabic on one side, English on the other. Hardcover, clean, sacred. Kareem held it out like a gift. But not the kind you wrap, the kind that wraps you. I want you to have this, he said. This one's for when you're ready to listen with your heart. Michael stared at it. His fingers barely brushed the edge. You sure positive? That night back at the bench, Michael did something he hadn't done in decades. He stood, not to stretch, not to leave, but to face the east. He didn't know which way Makkah was, didn't know what time prayer was, but he opened the mat, laid it down, and stood before it like a man approaching something sacred, something terrifying, something beloved. He raised his hands just like Kareem had shown him, then paused. His voice caught in his throat. He didn't know the words, didn't know how to bow, didn't even know what to say, but he whispered anyway, God, I'm here. And somehow that was enough. He didn't bow that night, not fully. He wasn't ready, but something in his soul had bent, and it bent toward mercy. The next day, Kareem came early. He found Michael waiting again, mat already folded Qur'an in hand. They didn't talk much that day. Instead, Kareem showed him how to make wudu, the washing before prayer. In the public restroom with cold water and quiet voices, Michael washed his hands. then his face, then his feet. He laughed. Feels like I'm scrubbing more than skin. Kareem nodded. You are. They returned to the bench. Kareem led a simple prayer. Michael followed as best he could, awkward, unsure, trembling. But when it came time to bow, to really bow, Michael hesitated. Go slow, Kareem whispered. Just lower your head, place it gently. Let your forehead touch the ground. And so he did, hands out, back bent, forehead touching concrete softened by his mat. And in that single movement, he did what decades of pain couldn't do. He surrendered. He didn't stay long in sujood, just a few seconds. But when he rose, there were tears on the mat. Again, he wiped his face. Didn't look at Kareem. He didn't need to. Kareem was smiling. And in that smile, Michael saw something he'd never seen in the mirror. Honor. That night, he didn't sleep. He just stared at the stars overhead, fingers still curled where they had once touched the earth. He wasn't Muslim yet, not officially, but something had already changed. He could feel it in the way he breathed, the way he walked, the way his soul no longer clawed for something nameless. It had found a name now, and soon, he would say it aloud. There are nights that pass like smoke, forgettable, thin, carried away by time. And then there are nights like this one, the kind that marks your soul like fire, the kind that heaven records. Michael hadn't planned it. He hadn't woken up that morning thinking, today is the day I change everything. But as the sun set and the world softened into quiet, he felt it. Something final, something firm. He was ready. He didn't tell Kareem in advance, didn't ask for a crowd, no camera, no certificate. He just waited until after Aisha, when the lights in the masjid had dimmed and most of the brothers had gone home. Kareem was wiping down the hallway near the wudu area when Michael approached. There was a tremble in his voice. I want to say it. Kareem paused, turned around slowly. The Shahada, he asked. Michael nodded. His eyes glistened under the hallway light. He clutched the Qur'an to his chest like a lifeline. I don't know if I'm doing it right, but I believe it. All of it. Kareem stepped forward. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be honest. They walked into the prayer room together, just the two of them, one light above, a silence so deep it felt like the room was holding its breath. Kareem stood beside him and said, repeat after me, word by word. Michael nodded, and then with his voice shaking, knees slightly buckling, and his soul finally standing upright, he began, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. His throat tightened, his chest lifted. Wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah, he finished. And the room was still, no claps, no music, just stillness. But Michael felt it as if the sky itself had tilted and something divine had been written with his breath. Kareem whispered, welcome, brother. From this day forward, you are Abdullah. Michael blinked. Abdullah? He tried the name on his tongue. It felt unfamiliar, but only in the way that truth feels when you finally stop resisting it. Servant of Allah. It didn't erase his past, but it redefined his value. He didn't cry this time. Not yet. His tears were still collecting, deeper than the eyes in a place no one could see. Instead, he smiled. A real one. The kind that hadn't been on his face since before he had a drinking problem, before the streets, before life hardened him into someone he didn't recognize. Kareem handed him a bottle of water. Let's pray 2 rak'ah, he said. Your first salah as a Muslim. Abdullah nodded slowly. I don't know the words yet. I'll guide you. They prayed together, just the two of them. Abdullah followed every move. Stand, bow, prostrate. The physical motions were still new, but his heart had already practiced them in silence for nights. He didn't rush, didn't fumble. Each action felt like peeling off layers of old skin, like shedding rust. When he came up from sujood and turned his head to the right to finish the prayer, his face was glowing. Kareem could see it, not metaphorically, not spiritually, physically glowing, like a man who had been baptized in silence and came out wrapped in light. After the prayer, they sat in stillness. Abdullah turned toward Kareem. I feel... He searched for the word. New. Kareem nodded. You are. They walked out of the masjid slowly. No rush, no fanfare. But everything had changed. The bench he once slept on. It was still there. But now, he had somewhere else to sit. to bow, to belong. That night back at Kareem's apartment, Abdullah took off his shoes slowly, like someone entering a sacred space. He didn't sleep. He sat with the Qur'an open on his lap, whispering verses he barely understood. But he understood enough. He was no longer lost, no longer invisible. His name was now known by the angels, by the Ummah, by the Lord of the heavens and the earth, and that was all he ever needed. Friday came like a whispered promise. The streets buzzed with weekend energy taxis, honking vendors calling children chasing kites through alleys. But for Abdullah, the world felt different, slower, clearer. He wasn't rushing, he was preparing. Kareem had laid out the clothes for him the night before. A crisp white shirt, soft cotton pants, a brand new kufi. Nothing extravagant but clean, respectable. Abdullah stared at his reflection in the mirror for a long time. He hadn't looked this closely in years. The beard was patchy. The face was older than he remembered. But the eyes, they weren't hollow anymore. They were alive. He stepped into the hallway where Kareem was waiting with a smile and a pair of miswaks. "You ready?" Kareem asked. Abdullah nodded, holding the Quran in his left hand and his folded prayer mat in the other. "I don't know if I'll do everything right," he admitted. Kareem grinned. "You're not walking into perfection. You're walking into mercy." The masjid was already filling. Men standing outside exchanging salams. Children playing quietly near the shoe racks. As they stepped through the gate, Abdullah felt a strange flutter in his chest. Not fear, not even anxiety. It was awe, like he was entering not just a building but a moment. They placed their shoes on the rack and Kareem showed him how to make wudu one more time this time, from the masjid tap's cold and flowing splashing purity into palms that had once known only dirt and tremble. Abdullah washed his face slowly. Each drop rolled down his cheeks like a rewriting, a gentle erasure of years no one else had seen. He dried his face with his sleeve and whispered, "Thank you for letting me be clean before you." They walked into the prayer hall together, carpet thick beneath their feet, the air laced with oud and quiet dhikr. The imam stood tall near the front, a man with calm shoulders and a voice like velvet when he spoke. Abdullah followed Kareem to the second row, sat down, closed his eyes, and waited. The khutbah began. The imam spoke in Arabic, then English, verses of Qur'an, stories of the Prophet, reminders of Allah's mercy, the fragility of life. Abdullah didn't catch every word, but the tone, the weight, the reverence. It wrapped around him like sunlight through glass. Then the imam said, "Some of you may be here for the first time. Some of you may have just returned. And to you we say, the doors of Allah's mercy never close." Abdullah's throat tightened. He pressed his hand against his chest, because something inside him was no longer holding still. He wasn't just attending his first Jumu'ah. He was walking into the center of his purpose. The call to prayer echoed through the hall, soft, strong, soaring. "Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar." Abdullah closed his eyes. And for a moment he wasn't in a masjid. He wasn't in the city. He wasn't in his body. He was somewhere higher, somewhere truer, where the only thing that existed was the one he had longed for his whole life. The congregation rose, feet aligned, shoulders brushed, and Abdullah, the man who used to sleep on a bench, the man no one saw, the man with no name, stood in the ranks of believers, equal, present, loved. The salah began. He followed Kareem's every move, hands raised, back bowed, forehead lowered. The motions weren't perfect, but the sincerity was flawless. And when his forehead touched the ground in sujud, he didn't feel the carpet beneath him. He felt peace, not the fragile peace of silence, the unshakable peace of returning. He whispered without meaning to, without rehearsing it, "Thank you." When the prayer ended, Kareem leaned over and embraced him. And in that embrace, Abdullah felt something more powerful than being forgiven. He felt welcomed. That night, he didn't go back to the bench. He stayed in Kareem's apartment, a quiet room, a soft bed, a Qur'an by the pillow. Before sleeping, he opened the book again. This time he read a single verse. "Indeed, Allah loves those who repent, and He loves those who purify themselves." Surah Al-Baqarah 2:222. He smiled. "He loves me. And that thought, that impossible, unbelievable, beautiful thought, was the last thing he remembered before falling asleep. The next morning felt like a second chance at being born. Abdullah rose before the sun washed in silence and stood at the window of Kareem's apartment, watching the sky shift from black to deep indigo. His heart was still, his hands were steady. Today he would pray again. Only this time it would be in the masjid, with the brothers, with his ummah, with Allah. He took his time getting ready, brushed his beard, buttoned his clean white shirt, smoothed the prayer mat Kareem had given him the week before. It had traveled with him from the bench to the masjid. It would stay with him wherever he went. Kareem stood near the door waiting with his usual quiet warmth. "You look ready," he said. Abdullah nodded. "I feel calm, like the storm has passed." Kareem smiled. "That's not calm, brother. That's certainty." They walked in silence through the early morning streets. Abdullah didn't carry his Qur'an today. He didn't need to. The verses had already carved themselves into his memory, into the rhythm of his breathing, into the way he walked. As they reached the masjid, he stopped for a moment at the gate. "I never thought I'd end up here," he whispered. Kareem touched his shoulder. "You didn't end up here. You were led here." Inside, the masjid was cool and quiet, the lights dim. A few elderly men were already seated, whispering dhikr on their prayer beads. The imam was preparing near the front, reciting softly. Abdullah made wudu like he had the day before, slow, deliberate, grateful. Every drop that touched his skin felt like forgiveness in motion. He entered the prayer hall, placed his mat next to Kareem, and sat. He closed his eyes. He was ready. The call to prayer rose through the room, soft, familiar, full of longing. "Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar," Abdullah whispered along. Not perfectly, not fluently, but with everything he had. When the imam stood to lead the prayer, Abdullah followed, standing, bowing, returning, and then sujud. He lowered himself slowly, forehead to the ground, heart to the sky, every breath in alignment with something eternal. He whispered, "Thank you for letting me come back before it was too late." Then he paused. One more breath, then nothing. Kareem didn't notice at first. No one did. The salah continued. But when they rose to stand, Kareem glanced to his left. Abdullah hadn't moved. Still in sujud, still bowed, still silent. Kareem's eyes narrowed. He leaned closer, touched his arm. "Brother," no response. He placed his hand on Abdullah's back. Warm, still, but motionless, completely still. The imam finished the prayer. People began to quietly disperse. Kareem remained, kneeling, watching. Something was wrong, and something was incredibly right. One of the older men approached, a retired doctor. He gently examined Abdullah, checked for a pulse, then looked up at Kareem with tears in his eyes. "He's gone." The room fell silent, not out of shock, not fear, but reverence, because something sacred had happened. A man had come from the streets, from the filth, from a life of loneliness and loss, and he had died in sujud. The janazah was held the same day. Word spread fast. No one knew much about him, just his name, Abdullah, the convert, the brother who walked in with light in his face and left with his forehead to the ground. The imam wept during the funeral prayer. Even men who had never spoken to Abdullah stood in silence, wiping tears, because they knew he hadn't just died, he had arrived. They buried him beneath a small olive tree near the back wall of the masjid, a simple grave, no marble, no carvings, just a small plaque. Abdullah, servant of Allah, returned in sujud. Kareem stood beside the grave long after everyone had gone. He held the old worn prayer mat in his hands, folded tightly like a memory. He whispered, "You died the way most of us only hope to live." Then he smiled through tears. "See you at the gates, brother." A week passed, then two. The masjid returned to its rhythm, adhan, salah, Qur'an, classes, evening dhikr. But something remained, a kind of stillness, not the empty kind, the kind that follows something beautiful, something too brief to last but too meaningful to forget. The olive tree at the edge of the masjid grounds had never drawn attention before, but now people passed it slower. Some paused beside it after prayer. A few recited Fatiha. Children would ask, "Who's buried here?" and their fathers would say, a man who died in sujud. That was all they knew, and all they needed to know. Kareem sat under that tree every Friday afternoon. He never told the full story, not because he was hiding it, but because the truth of it could only be understood in silence. Still, people asked, especially one boy. His name was Yusuf, 10 years old. Bright eyes, always asking questions. He had seen the janazah, watched Kareem cry, and he never forgot. One day he approached while Kareem was sitting under the tree. Mr. Kareem, he said, is it true that he wasn't Muslim long? Kareem nodded. He was Muslim for just a few days. Yusuf sat beside him, twirled a blade of grass between his fingers. That's not fair, Kareem turned. Why he didn't get to do Hajj, or fast, or even learn much Qur'an? Kareem smiled gently. No, he didn't. He paused, then added, but he returned to Allah in sujud, and that's more than some do in a lifetime. Yusuf blinked slowly. What was his name? Kareem stared at the plaque for a long time before answering. Abdullah. Was that his real name? Kareem shook his head. I don't think so, but it was the name that fit him best. Why? Because he didn't belong to the streets, or to addiction, or to pain. He belonged to Allah, and Abdullah means the servant of Allah. Yusuf didn't speak for a while after that. He just sat in silence as if trying to picture it. A man with no home, no past worth telling, but a name that even angels recognized. Kareem eventually rose to leave. Yusuf followed quiet. Before parting, he asked, do you think Allah really loved him? Kareem stopped, turned slowly. Yusuf, I think Allah was waiting for him his whole life, and when he finally said, I'm here, Allah said, then come home. That night, Yusuf wrote in his school journal, today I met a man who died in sujud. I never saw his face, but I think he must have been shining, like the people who finally find what they were born for. He drew a small tree beside it, and beneath the tree, the word Abdullah. Years later, Yusuf would grow up. He would lead youth programs in that same masjid. He would teach other boys how to make wudu, how to bow, how to return. And every year on the same day, he would bring them to the olive tree. He would tell the story, not as a tragedy, but as a reminder that you don't have to live a long life to live a complete one. You just have to bow before it's too late. And perhaps somewhere beyond clouds and time, Abdullah is still in sujud. Not out of obligation, but out of peace. The kind of peace that comes when a lost man finds his Lord. And the Lord says, come, I've been waiting for you. In the end, Abdullah never got a funeral broadcast on screens. He never made a YouTube video, never gave a khutbah, never even finished learning Al-Fatiha. But he died in prostration with no reputation on earth and complete recognition in the heavens. Some stories don't end with applause, they end with silence. And in that silence, Allah writes their name, where no hand can erase it.